Bloodstained Check-In. Chapter 1. The Hidden Hostel. Lena, Mark, and Alex were backpacking through Eastern Europe, craving adventure and cheap thrills. When they arrived in a small, isolated town in Romania, a friendly bartender recommended a hidden hostel. No tourists, just locals. Eager to escape the usual traveler spots, they took the offer. The hostel sat on the edge of a dark forest, its stone walls aged and cracked. The path leading up to it was barely lit by a few dim lanterns casting long, eerie shadows over the trees. The air was damp, carrying the scent of earth and something faintly metallic. As they stepped inside, the reception area was eerily quiet. A woman with hollow eyes checked them in, barely speaking. Her fingers, bony and unnaturally long, drummed against the desk as she slid them their keys. A faded portrait of a faceless man hung behind her, giving Lena an unshakable sense of unease. Their room was musty, the furniture old and scarred with deep scratches, the wallpaper peeled in places, revealing dark stains underneath. Mark made a joke about the place looking like a set from a horror movie, but his laughter died down when none of them joined in. Something about this place felt wrong. Yet, exhaustion won, and they decided to brush off the unease. That night, Lena awoke to the sound of muffled cries. At first, she thought it was just the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, but then she heard it again, clearer, more desperate. She shook Mark and Alex awake. "Listen," she whispered. The cries were faint, coming from the floor below. They exchanged nervous glances. "Maybe it's another guest," Mark suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Lena wasn't sure why, but every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. And Chapter 2. The Basement Horror. Their curiosity and fear led them into the hallway, following the sounds. The wooden floor groaned beneath their feet, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise silent building. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering light bulbs casting distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. A draft carried the scent of damp wood and something else, something rancid. They descended a narrow, spiral staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The cries were no longer muffled. They were clear now, pleading, desperate voices. A heavy wooden door stood at the bottom, its surface marred with deep gouges, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. Mark grabbed the doorknob. Locked. He searched the nearby kitchen and found an old rusted knife. Wedging it into the crack, he forced the door open with a groan of protest from the wood. The second the door swung open, a foul stench hit them, rotting flesh and blood-soaked air. The basement was a nightmare, chains hung from the ceiling, some still occupied by limp, barely breathing bodies. Hooks jutted from the walls, some dripping fresh blood. A table in the center held an array of rusted tools, each coated in dried gore. The walls were lined with shelves filled with preserved body parts, floating in cloudy liquid. A figure in a blood-stained apron turned towards them. His mask, stitched together from different pieces of human flesh, barely covered the grotesque deformity underneath. He held a bone saw in one hand, its teeth glinting under the dim light. Behind him, two more figures emerged from the shadows. their faces obscured by crude masks made of stretched skin. Lena's breath hitched in her throat. Alex let out a strangled gasp. Then the masked man stepped forward. Lena screamed as Alex pushed her back. "Run!" They scrambled up the stairs, but the hostel staff was already there, blocking their exit. The woman at the front desk no longer looked vacant. Her grin stretched too wide, her eyes shining with sadistic hunger. Her hands flexed, revealing long, sharpened nails. Mark swung the knife wildly, catching one of them in the arm. A guttural snarl ripped from the injured man's throat, but it bought them enough time. They bolted through a side door, sprinting into the dark forest. Heavy footsteps thundered behind them. Lena turned back just in time to see Alex dragged into the shadows, his scream cut short. Terror surged through her veins, but she had no time to mourn. She and Mark had to keep running. Chapter 3. The Forest of Trophies. Mark and Lena ran deeper into the trees, breathless, hearts pounding. When they finally stopped, silence surrounded them. No pursuers, no sounds. Just the whispering wind through the trees. Then, a rustling from above. They looked up. Hanging from the branches were bodies, stripped, skinned, and displayed like trophies. Some were fresh, others long decayed, their exposed bones gleaming under the pale moonlight. Their faces were frozen in terror, lifeless eyes staring down at them. A nauseating smell of decay filled the air. Lena's stomach churned and she covered her mouth to keep from retching. Mark stepped forward, reaching out to touch a dangling limb, but a sudden creaking sound stopped him. A trap. The moment his fingers brushed against the corpse, the ground beneath them cracked. Hidden spikes jutted up from a pit, their rusted tips drenched in dried blood. They barely leapt away in time, their bodies crashing into the damp earth. Then, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed behind them. Lena turned, her breath hitching in her throat. The masked man stood just a few feet away, tilting his head. His knife gleamed under the moonlight, its edge dripping with fresh blood. His presence was eerily silent. No heavy breathing, no sound of movement. He simply stared, as if savoring their fear. Mark grabbed Lena's hand and yanked her to her feet. "Run!" They bolted deeper into the forest, but the twisted maze of trees felt endless. The branches clawed at them, tearing into their skin. Shadows moved between the trunks, figures lurking just out of reach, whispering in the darkness. Then, Mark tripped. Lena spun around just as he hit the ground, his ankle caught in a steel bear trap. He let out a strangled cry, blood pooling beneath him. "Mark!" She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to pry the trap open. The masked man stepped closer, dragging his knife across the bark of a tree, the sound grating and slow. More figures emerged from the darkness, their grotesque forms surrounding them. The realization hit Lena like ice in her veins. They were never meant to escape. The last thing Lena heard was her own scream before darkness swallowed her whole.